At the end of the season, Honda will officially leave Formula One. The company took the decision to leave in October 2020 with their goal to focus on zero-emission engine technologies. But since then, they've produced one of the fastest power units on the grid and could well be on to win a world championship this year. So should Honda regret pulling out of Formula One? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Honda's decision to leave. Honda's decision to leave Formula One was not the first time that they'd done so. This is in fact the end of their fourth stint in the sport, and so they're no strangers to picking up their bags and heading elsewhere. The premise behind leaving the sport was due to the business goals being to become carbon neutral by 2050 and electric sales to represent 2/3 of their total by 2030. As such, the company determined that the huge amount of resources that are dedicated to the Formula One project would need to be focused elsewhere, hence the decision to leave Formula One. It's worth noting here that Formula One also has a carbon neutral goal by 2030 and is investigating the use of sustainable fuels in the future, with the 2026 engine regulations set to have a significant sustainability focus. Even the current power units have some of the best kinetic and thermal energy recovery technology in the world, and they're striving to increase the efficiency of these power units further. So these two organisations' goals do align, which makes Honda's justification and reasoning seem somewhat disingenuous. Perhaps it could be the high cost of engine development in Formula One that has made Honda want to look elsewhere. Looking at Honda's latest stint in Formula One, since they rejoined the sport in 2015 with McLaren, for a number of years they struggled. In fact, struggled is an understatement. They were atrocious. They had the worst power unit on the grid, and it was the beginning of a turbulent period of time for McLaren and Honda together. The ambition of coming back to Formula One for these new regulations was to get to a point where they could dominate the sport alongside McLaren, as they did in the 1980s. But rejoining the sport a year into these new power unit regulations left the Honda team a significant way behind the rest of the power unit producers. It led to a difficult relationship between Honda and McLaren, with the radio comments from Fernando Alonso in particular being broadcasted to the world. His comparison of the engine to a GP2 car was particularly tough on the Honda setup. In the end, this relationship between Honda and McLaren would last just 3 seasons, with a Constructors' Championship finishing position of 9th, 6th and 9th over those 3 years. A shocking performance from one of the most successful Formula One teams in its history. But for Honda, they remained in the sport, having been offered a lifeline from the Toro Rosso team for 2018. This was part of a longer-term plan as Red Bull's relationship with the Renault team was breaking down. And Honda had the opportunity to prove that they could produce an engine which could compete at the front, and it didn't take long before that was proven for the Red Bull team, as Pierre Gasly achieved a 4th place finish in Bahrain, a circuit which is heavily power dependent. So that started a trend of what was to come for Honda as they started to find their way to the front of the grid. But before we look at Honda's recovery from the lows of the McLaren days, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. We're aiming for 25,000 subscribers by the end of the season, so if you're new around here, then make sure to subscribe. Thanks. The rise to the top. So once Honda had proved themselves with Toro Rosso, they ended up supplying both Toro Rosso and Red Bull for 2019. So for the first time in the turbo hybrid era, they were providing 4 cars with power units. This might not sound like a big step, but the additional data that they would receive from running 4 cars was always going to leave them in a position where they're able to learn and improve faster, and that's exactly what the Honda team have done. At the very first race of the 2019 season, a Honda-powered car returned to the podium for the first time since its return to Formula One. Max Verstappen took 3rd at the opening round in Australia, behind both Mercedes cars but ahead of Ferrari. Verstappen continued to do well in the 2019 season with consistent top 5 finishes and the occasional podium. Admittedly, on the power-hungry circuits, Verstappen tended to be outside of the podium positions, losing out to Ferrari, who had a suspiciously powerful engine that season. But regardless, it was a big improvement for Honda, and it proved that they had an engine that could rival that of Renault, given the Red Bull team offered more of a direct comparison from 2018 to 2019. Later in that year, at the Austrian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen delivered once again and took the win at that race. Honda's first since 2006, when Jenson Button took his first ever Grand Prix victory for the Honda Works team. So there had been a 13-year gap between the wins, and it was Honda's first time in the turbo hybrid era. An excellent progression which had proven that they were making the progress that Red Bull had expected and wanted. It was also starting to look like the return to the grid as a power unit provider was coming good for the Japanese manufacturer after those 3 challenging years with McLaren. And just 2 races later, Honda powered 2 drivers to the podium at the chaotic Grand Prix in Germany, with Max Verstappen taking the win and Daniel Kvyat taking 3rd position in that rain-affected race. This was another step in the right direction for the team and a landmark moment for Honda, as it was the first time that 2 Honda-powered cars had shared a podium since Portugal in 1992. And yes, it was a race where luck had played a significant factor. Keeping your car on the circuit was challenging enough on that day. But it was a step in the right direction for the team, and yet more proof that they could provide a power unit which was capable of winning races, as well as having strong reliability, something that the Renault power unit fell short on Red Bull's expectations the previous year. The rest of the 2019 season provided more podiums for Verstappen and even another double Honda podium in Brazil, where Pierre Gasly shared the podium with Max Verstappen after the Dutchman took his 3rd win of the season. And towards the end of the year, it was notable that on average the Honda-powered cars did end up taking more power unit elements than the others on the grid, the Toro Rosso cars in particular both taking more elements than any other team. But for Red Bull, their cars took a very similar amount of power units to the 4 Renault-powered cars, so whilst they would have probably preferred more reliability from the Honda engines, it wasn't exactly a step backwards for the Red Bull team. 2020 saw more progress for Honda as they became the 2nd strongest power unit on the grid. This was mostly due to the loss of power for Ferrari after that suspicious engine got caught by an FIA technical directive towards the end of the 2019 season. But over that shortened F1 season, in every single race bar one that Verstappen finished, he was on the podium. And that one race was the Turkish Grand Prix, where it was a challenge for all teams to make the right strategy calls given how slippery that track was. So it was a step up from an occasional podium and race win in 2019 to consistent podium finishes in 2020. But it's worth noting that Verstappen did suffer 5 DNFs over the 17-race season, 2 of which were engine-related, with an electronic issue in Austria and an engine issue leading to his retirement in Monza. So once again, some disappointing moments, but still a positive year for Honda, especially having become the first team in the turbo hybrid era to win with 2 different teams, given Pierre Gasly's shock win for AlphaTauri in Monza. But regardless of these results and the step in the right direction, it was towards the end of the 2020 season when Honda announced that they would be leaving the sport at the end of 2021. So just as it was starting to look like it was getting better for Red Bull and Honda, they decided to go. Therefore, 2021 was the last chance for Honda to produce a championship-winning power unit in the turbo hybrid era, and to do that, they accelerated their 2022 development to bring it forward to their 2021 engine. This was inherently a risk. They may well have been able to produce a power unit with the extra power, but they risked ending up with a less reliable engine as a result. And with a combination of the new aerodynamic regulations and this step forward with the power unit from Honda, it meant Red Bull, for a large portion of this season, have had the strongest car on the grid. And arguably, Honda have had the most reliable power unit on the grid, with the Mercedes team in particular being forced to take additional internal combustion engines in the back end of the season to remain competitive. Something that Honda haven't had to do, given their engines don't seem to be deteriorating as much as their rivals. It's meant that Verstappen has led the majority of the laps so far in 2021 and won the most races. And for their 3rd energy store of the season, Honda bought an upgrade to that part of the power unit, increasing its ability to harvest and store energy. In addition, the energy store is estimated to be around 5 kilos lighter than the previous version, which has allowed the Red Bull team to redistribute the weight within the car and further improve their chassis. So it's fair to say that Honda has produced its best power unit of the era at their final opportunity. But regardless, the decision to leave is in motion, and the transition to the future has begun already. The future for Red Bull. Following Honda's decision to leave the sport, there was a huge decision for Red Bull to make. The team wouldn't be able to take a Mercedes power unit given the Mercedes team are providing 4 teams already. Likewise, Ferrari wouldn't want to provide a direct rival with an engine, and so it would just be the Renault power units that are available, given they only supply Alpine at the moment. And by the regulations, Red Bull and AlphaTauri would have to be offered Renault engines if they were in need, given they provide fewer teams with power units currently. But the relationship there is frosty at best, as I've already mentioned in this video. But Red Bull instead have taken the bold decision to take over the development of the power units themselves, bringing the engine development in-house. A development and investment which is going to cost the team a huge amount of money, and probably wouldn't have happened without the recent introduction of the cost cap for car development. Red Bull Powertrains has been formed and is to be heavily supported by Honda for 2022, with a full transition planned for 2023 and beyond. In addition, Honda employees in the UK have been included as part of a transition process, which means they'll move to work for the Red Bull Powertrains organisation. It will see Red Bull become a works team for the first time, given when they moved to the Honda Power units, both Red Bull and AlphaTauri were deemed to be customer teams. To add to that, Red Bull Powertrains has been growing rapidly, with 300 to 500 new employees in place in that new department, and these have included some significant hires from Mercedes to Red Bull. In addition, the power unit regulations themselves are set to be frozen in 2022, which is something that the team had set up as a condition for them taking over the Honda project for next year. Either way, any success that Red Bull has over the next few years will at least have some element of it attributed to Honda, given the fundamental intellectual property has come from the Japanese manufacturer. So ultimately, I think that Honda should regret their decision to leave, as fundamentally their goals align with those of Formula One. They've absolutely rebuilt their reputation, especially with this season's performance, regardless of whether they win or lose this championship, and the future is bright. The Honda/Red Bull power unit goes into the engine freeze as one of the strongest on the grid, and at the same time, something I haven't even mentioned in this video is the fact that a young Japanese driver in Yuki Tsunoda has indeed arrived in the sport. So the future is bright, and sadly, Honda may not get the credit it deserves if Red Bull emerges the strongest team in those new regulations. What do you think of Honda's departure? Should they regret their decision? Let me know in the comments, make sure to leave a like on the video if you've watched this far, and thanks for watching.